thing. Right. Right. So we're making content, and I'm talking about how China actually got rich. The new Gravel Institute video.
The single most stunning economic story of the last few decades has been the rise of China. From 1980 to 2020, China's economy grew more than 75-fold. Huge new cities were built. Hundreds of millions escaped poverty.
800 million Chinese were extremely poor, and now they are not. You have to ask yourself how that happens. When we've got like 300 or so odd million people in this country, and we can't seem to get anybody out of poverty.
It was the largest and most rapid improvement in material conditions on record in modern history. Let's go back. When the economist Adam Smith was writing in the 1700s, he considered China to be one of the wealthiest countries that had ever existed. But after decades of war and instability in the 19th century and early 20th century, China began a rapid decline. Up until a few decades ago, China was one of the poorest countries on earth. But now China is an economic powerhouse. Economists predict that it will overtake the US as the largest economy in the world in this decade. People called it the Chinese miracle. You can hear some people describe this miracle as a straightforward story of the free market. They say, it's a simple story. China was poor, then the economy was freed from the grip of the state. Now China is rich. But this is misleading. China's rise was not about the triumph of the free market. To understand why, we have to look at what happened to other countries which remade their own economies in the same period, often to disastrous
I'm trying to find the Hillary Clinton video where she says you can't beat a centrally planned economy.
effects.
Comrade
Since the
Clinton
1980s, free market policies have swept the globe. Many countries have undergone far-ranging transformations, liberalizing all prices, privatizing entire industries, and opening up to free trade. But many of the economies that were subjected to markets overnight have since stagnated or decayed. None have had a growth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You could see the US media right now charging up for this Cold War with China.
Record anything like the one seen in China. African countries endured brutal economic shrinkage. Latin America experienced 25 years of stagnation. If we compare China to Russia, the other giant of communism in the 20th century, the contrast is even more staggering. Under state socialism, Russia was an industrial superpower, while China was still largely an agricultural economy. Yet during the same period, the Chinese reform led to an incredible economic growth. Russia's reform led to a brutal collapse. Both China and Russia had been economies that were organized largely through state commands. Individual players could only act within the structures set by state planning. Think of playing foosball. Each individual player can only be moved along with the rod to which it is attached. It is a rigid setup. You can only go back and forth or rotate. Market reforms in both Russia and China was like moving from foosball to an actual soccer game. Players now could move freely. But while Russia jumped right into the game without setting up a proper stadium, rules or jury, in China the state took the lead in setting up all infrastructure. The state built the team, it trained the players, educated the coaches, and designed an overall strategy. Russia followed the recommendations of the most
how China actually got. All liberalizing your economy does is let foreign capital move in and loot you.
Quote-unquote scientific economics at the time, a policy of so-called shock therapy. As a basic principle, the idea was that the old planned economy had to be destroyed to make space for the market to emerge. Think of shock therapy like knocking over a Jenga tower.
How about this? Shock therapy is the capitalist going, oh, My poor market is not free. I stay up at night worrying about my market. My market is in chains. I would rather the people be in chains via wage slavery. And so they're like, oh, we must make my market free. And so they just put everyone into wage slavery and, indentured servitude.
After a short period of pain, Russia was supposed to emerge as a fully fledged capitalist economy almost.
The cost of your quote-unquote free market is us being wage slaves. I need y'all to connect those dots.
Overnight. The leader of the plan announced it was a way of destroying communism in Russia. When Russian President Boris Yeltsin took power, he eliminated all price controls, privatized state-owned companies and assets, and immediately opened Russia up to global trade. So what happened? In a word, catastrophe. The Soviet economy was already in disarray, but shock therapy was a fatal blow. The shock therapists had predicted some short-term pain, but what they did not see coming was how severe, destructive,
what the shock therapists not see coming,
and permanent the effects would be. Consumer prices spiraled out of control. Nice. Hyperinflation took hold. Government coffers were looted. GDP fell by 40%. The shock therapy recession in Russia was deeper and longer than the American Great Depression by a large margin. This was a disaster for ordinary Russian people. HIV infections, alcoholism, childhood malnutrition, and crime went through the roof. Life expectancy for Russian men fell by 7 years, more than any industrialized country has ever experienced in peacetime.
That's like war, dude. That's what happens during wartime. They did a class war, y'all.
In 2006, Russian life expectancy was still several years lower than it had been in 1986 under the Soviet Union. It turned out that Russia didn't get a successful free market overnight.
I don't know what that accent is. I can't place it.
Instead, it went from a stagnating economy to a hollowed out wreckage dominated by oligarchs. If simply getting rid of price controls and government employment didn't make a country prosper, and in fact destroyed its economy and killed huge numbers of people, then clearly the rapid application of free markets was not the simple solution.
Like a free market.
When Deng Xiaoping took over the leadership of China in 1978, the country he inherited was still desperately poor. In 1980, China had a per capita GDP of just $194. That was less than Sudan and Haiti, and almost half of Niger.
I don't know about that.
The Chinese leadership knew they needed reform. As I show in my book, How China Escaped Shock Therapy, throughout the 1980s, the Chinese leadership repeatedly considered implementing the same type of sudden reforms that Russia had pursued later. The idea of starting from a clean slate seemed attractive, and shock therapy was widely promoted by quote-unquote scientific economics. Programs for rapid price liberalization were prepared and then withdrawn twice. But in the end, they decided not to pursue shock therapy. Unlike the free market economists in Russia, economists in China approached change like a game of Jenga. Take out many pieces at once and the whole thing falls apart. Take out one piece at a time and you can win the game. Instead of knocking over the whole Jenga tower at once, China reformed itself in an experimental and gradual way. Market activities were tolerated and actively promoted in non-essential parts of the economy. China implemented a system of what they called dual-track pricing. State-owned enterprises and farmers had to deliver their quotas to the government at a certain price, set by the government. But if they managed to produce more, they could sell their surplus at a market price. China was learning from the real story of the world's most developed nations, countries like the United States, Britain, Japan, and South Korea. Each of these, in their own way, managed and planned the development of their economies and markets, protecting early-stage industries and controlling investment.
So I do think that we've got to get smarter about how we deal with the economic threat. And for people who say, oh, well, you know, that disrupts the market. China has disrupted the market. China is not a free market economy. We tried. We let them into the World Trade Organization. We sent our businesses over there. We made trade deals. They are a controlled, top-down economy. You will never compete and win against them unless you take back the means of production.
Free market economists thought this system would be a disaster. The American economist Milton Friedman...
Fuck that guy, man. I hate that guy. All my homies hate Milton Friedman and the Chicago boys.
...to Deng's premier Zhao Ziyang. He said that the dual price system was a bad idea and that China
should... Get wrecked, loser.
...should, quote, free prices and wages...
Look at this Nobel Prize he got! What? They gave him a Nobel Prize in economics or something? Did I never hear about that?
In one bold stroke.
China should free prices. This is the fucking argument that these people have a real problem with. They cannot seem to center people in their arguments. Instead, they're very worried about their markets and their prices. Oh no, what would happen if the price feels bad at night? What would happen if the price doesn't have a place to sleep at night? What would happen if the price can't afford to put food on their table? No, they're not talking about people. They're talking about prices. They're talking about the markets. Like, this is their problem.
End of quote.
What up, and
just like in Russia.
Following
but China's leaders didn't listen. And while Russia collapsed after following the shock therapy program, China saw remarkable success. The state kept control over the backbone of the industrial economy.
Fuck off, neoliberalism.
As well as the ownership over land. As China grew into the new dynamics of its economy, state institutions were not degraded to fossils from the past, but were often the drivers at the frontier of new industries, protecting and guaranteeing their own growth. China today is not a free market economy in any sense of the word. It is a state-led market economy. The government effectively owns all land.
What do they say? Socialism with Chinese characteristics?
And China leverages state ownership through market competition to steer the economy as a whole. The shock therapy approach advocated around the world was a failure. While Russia collapsed after its sudden transformation, China's gradual reforms allowed it to thrive. And that made all the difference. I'm Isabella Weber, Assistant Professor of Economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst for the Gravel Institute.
It's a good piece. They did pretty good, huh? That's just like what Western media doesn't like do, which is be thirsty, bloodthirsty to do a China bed. They're just so desperate to do a China bed. And so what happens is when you hold off on that a little bit, you get to get down to the bottom of what's actually happening. You get to have a material understanding of how China pulled 800 million plus people out of extreme poverty, over a few decades. You got to ask yourself how and why they would do that, and why we don't do that here. Why don't we pull people out of poverty? Why are we putting more and more people into poverty? It's because we have a disgusting country, because it's led by disgusting people. I have way more faith in the working class than I do in the owning class. Get my... I have one of these.
Kenzo Shibata once said, poverty shouldn't be.
Yeah. right, this one too. This one's bugging me. This is like not precise. Damn, dude. Doesn't feel precise. Nice. Still don't look right. Okay. What are we doing here? Our financial system's based on a lot of debt. The more people in debt, the richer we are as a country. Well, yeah. Poverty's good for capitalism. Capitalism depends on it, you know. It means they've gotten the max from you while not killing you directly. It's kind of wild to talk about China during that time and ignore the one-child policy, though. Is it? I don't know. Libertarian economics so magical in its thinking you could slap it into pieces just by letting them try it. It's a dead end, right? Yeah. Okay. Good piece. Good piece. Box. Okay. Oh. Sorry. Thanks for watching. My viewers, stick around. YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, like, comment below. Join us here on the live stream where we talk about this and stuff like this each day. Love your face.